Scott has been supporting you until now, but I won't let that happen anymore. A jobless NEET should leave. This was my house, and the ones who should leave were my eldest son and his wife, the real jobless NEETs. But my daughter-in-law seemed oblivious to that. This is my house. Why should I leave? Feel free to take Scott with you. 2 weeks later, my eldest son, who was supposed to have returned to his in-laws, showed up at my house. My name is Dora, 72 years old. My hobby is karaoke. I never had any interest in karaoke, but after being invited by my part-time colleagues, I got hooked. Now it's my daily pleasure to go singing with them after work. Since my husband Scott passed away a few years ago, I had been living alone, but now I'm living with my son, Scott. Scott, 43, married Kiera, his same-aged partner, last year. They had been living in Kiera's parents' home as per her wish. However, last week, Scott came home and said, "I'm separating from Kiera." I thought they might have had a fight, but the reason was much more serious. A few months ago, Scott quit his previous job for career advancement and joined a new company, which turned out to be a dark company with unexpected and unpaid overtime. He was harassed daily by a nepotism-based superior and was increasingly exhausted by stress and overwork until he developed mental health issues. If only Kiera had noticed Scott's worsening condition, things might have been different. Despite returning home exhausted from daily overtime, Kiera never once asked, "Are you okay?" When Scott mentioned quitting, Kiera said, "What about money if you quit? Even with the unpaid overtime, the salary is higher than your previous job, so it's fine." Kiera, a homemaker in name, didn't keep up with the housework. Yet she insisted Scott keep working while she spent his earnings on outings. Reaching his limits, Scott visited a psychiatrist who advised quitting his job. Knowing Kiera would rage if she found out, Scott didn't tell her about quitting and came to me for help instead. I suggested a divorce, but he's too weak physically and mentally to consider it now and just asked to stay at my place for a while. While I wished Scott would divorce such a wife, I respected his decision. I agreed to let Scott live with me. However, we needed a plausible reason for Scott staying here to tell Kiera. After discussing with Scott, we concocted a story that I had injured my leg and couldn't live alone. We planned to tell Kiera that he should move in with me to help out, and he could commute to work from here. I wasn't injured. At over 70, I was still working. But we had to convince Kiera somehow. I needed to ensure Kiera didn't find out I was still working. If she learned I was working, she might forcibly take Scott back without discussion, hurling harsh words at him. A scenario easy to imagine. Until Scott recovered, we had to keep up this charade. So I told Scott, "You've been through a lot, so now you should rest at home." Saying this, I continued to leave for work every day. Scott met Kiera on weekends to update her on his situation, ensuring she didn't suspect anything. Though Scott was still visiting a psychiatrist, I worried about Kiera's harsh words affecting him. If I didn't see Kiera at all, she'd probably storm here. "I can't burden you further. I'll be fine." He reassured me and went to meet Kiera on weekends. But about a month after Scott moved in, Kiera finally came to our house. It was my day off, so I was at home. Hearing the doorbell, I checked the camera, saw Kiera, informed Scott, then went to open the front door. "Long time no see, Dora." Kiera approached without a hint of a friendly smile, glaring at me as she spoke. "It's been almost a month since Scott came to take care of you, Dora. Isn't your leg injury getting any better?" I could hear her inner voice, not caring about me but eager to take Scott back home. "Yes, that's right. I still can't do without the crutches." I glanced at the crutches I was holding. They were once used by my husband and had been in the house ever since. I'm sorry for the trouble I've caused you because of my injury. It really is a bother, Dora. You say your leg is injured, but you're not bedridden, are you? Stop taking advantage of Scott's kindness. I was taken aback by the directness of my daughter-in-law's accusation. The audacity of Kiera, who didn't care about Scott and spent his money on her outings, to blame me was unthinkable. That day she left after about 30 minutes of complaints, but then she started calling frequently. Worried about seeming suspicious if I didn't answer, I explained the situation to my workplace and they allowed me to work while on calls. However, it was honestly a huge inconvenience. Every day, Kiera would call to say, "Isn't your leg healed yet? Stop depending on Scott. Give Scott back," she even demanded. I had so much I wanted to retort, but each time I held back, thinking of Scott's face and enduring Kiera's complaints. However, the daily calls were gradually becoming a source of stress for me. Holding my mobile phone, I sat on the living room sofa, sighing deeply. Despite not trying to show my fatigue in front of Scott, it seemed I couldn't hide it anymore. Seeing me, Scott apologized with a look of regret. "Mom, I'm sorry about Kiera. You're busy with work, and here I am, a grown man, still relying on you. It's pathetic." I shook my head, thinking it wasn't his fault. "It's okay. You've had a hard time at your previous job, so now it's my turn to take care of you. Just rest for now." Although I reassured him, Scott opened his laptop, insisting on finding a job soon. Knowing he was advised to continue counseling, I urged him not to rush and to take his time recovering. "Thanks, Mom. I'm so glad you're my mother." Scott's grateful smile warmed my heart. "I'm also glad you're my son," I conveyed warmly. To outsiders, my life might seem difficult, but no matter his age, Scott is my child. As a mother, it's natural for me to want to help my child. His happiness is my happiness. Kiera's calls continued, but I began to brush them off. One day, I returned home without notifying Scott of my arrival time. Usually after work, I would send a message to Scott, ask him what he'd like for dinner, and then go shopping before heading home. But that day, I decided to visit a restaurant for the first time in a while, and bought Scott's favorite takeout to bring home. Moreover, since it was a direct return from a client meeting, I arrived home quite early, thinking Scott might still be at his psychiatric appointment. I entered the entrance and saw unfamiliar women's shoes. At that moment, I was struck by an unpleasant sensation. Could it be that Kiera found out Scott had quit his job and was lying about staying here? With that thought, I hurried to the living room, but the female voice I heard wasn't Kiera's. "Well, I guess I should head back now." "Aw, come on, stay a little longer. Mom's still at work and won't be back yet. Let's hang out some more." I stood, frozen, listening to their laughter and cheerful conversation, bewildered. What was happening? My mind couldn't catch up. "But it's not fair to your mom. She thinks you're still going to the hospital, right? And here you are, all well." Mothers are happy when they can do something for their kids. Besides, I came to stay with her, who was living alone and lonely. It's like a filial duty. "But don't you plan to find a job and keep living like this?" "Nah, I'm telling Mom I'm still going to the psychiatrist and plan to stay here without working. I'm thinking of divorcing Kiera, too, so we can be together always." "Ew, a guy without money is such a turnoff." "Once Mom passes away, I'll inherit her savings, so money won't be an issue." "Ugh, what a terrible son. And when will that be?" Hearing their laughter, I quietly left the house, locking the door behind me. I went to a nearby cafe and messaged Scott that I would be home soon. I imagined Scott hurriedly sending the woman away. Reflecting on Scott's words, I wondered if he really said that. "Once Mom's gone, I'll inherit her savings, so there will be money." Could those really have been Scott's words? The claim of attending psychiatric sessions was also a lie. His seemingly remorseful behavior was all a facade. "I'm glad you're my mother." Were those words meant to praise me for being gullible and overly indulgent with my son? Tears streamed down my face. I couldn't stop crying in front of others, something I hadn't done since my husband passed away. After a while, I returned home as if nothing happened. Scott, feigning concern as usual, greeted me. His cheerful demeanor from earlier seemed like a lie. While thinking this, I handed Scott the takeout from the restaurant. "Oh, this is my favorite from back in the day." He appeared happy, but I wasn't fooled by his smile anymore. Then I called Kiera. "Your frequent calls are really bothering me. It's causing me stress. I don't want to end up in the hospital because of your calls, so please don't contact me again." After saying my piece, I hung up, feeling slightly relieved for having expressed my pent-up feelings. Within 30 minutes, the doorbell rang. Pleased that they reacted just as I expected, I opened the front door. There stood Kiera, her face red with anger, glaring and shouting at me. "Please come in, don't disturb the neighbors." As Kiera entered the living room, Scott, eating takeout, looked at her in surprise, fork in hand. "Scott, what are you doing, leisurely eating takeout?" Scott, clueless, looked fearfully between Kiera and me. "If my calls are stressing you out, I won't call anymore, but in exchange, I'm taking Scott back. You've been living off him, but no more. The jobless NEET needs to leave." Her words were contradictory as usual, demanding Scott back and then telling him to leave. This is my house. If anyone should leave, it's the Scott couple, fitting the description of jobless NEETs, though Kiera seemed unaware of that. Scott appeared quite panicked in the face of Kiera's raging temper. Behind Kiera, he mouthed to me, asking what happened. Ignoring him, I said cheerfully, "Why should I leave my own house? Feel free to take Scott with you. My leg is just fine." I jumped on the spot to prove my point. Kiera, slightly taken aback by my words but seemingly pleased at the offer to take Scott, said, "Then I'll take Scott, but don't expect any help from us in the future. Not even if you're injured or hospitalized. Manage your finances yourself, and don't contact Scott. Scott, don't answer her calls." After saying her piece, she pulled Scott's arm and left. Scott looked back at me with a tearful expression until the entrance door closed. But for a 43-year-old son who lied easily and wished for his mother's death, I felt no desire to help him anymore. In the now quiet room, I sat in front of my husband's photo and spoke to it. Is it my fault that Scott turned out like this? Images of Scott as a sweet child flashed through my mind. Tears rolled down my cheeks again. Unable to sleep that night, I woke up to find it was morning and decided to take the day off of work. After packing Scott's belongings into cardboard boxes and clearing the room, I felt much lighter. I returned to work the next day, ready to resume my normal life. However, 2 weeks later, Scott, who was supposed to have gone back to his in-laws, showed up at my house. "What are you doing here?" "Mom, it's terrible." There was Scott, 43 years old, crying and screaming at the entrance. Embarrassed by the neighbors, I sighed and let him come up. "So why are you here? Why did you suddenly become so cold? You're supposed to be on my side, aren't you?" Listening to Scott, it seemed that Kiera was initially happy to have him back, but didn't take her long to realize he was unemployed. Since then, Scott was subjected to daily verbal abuse. He had even been deprived of his mobile phone, unable to contact anyone. "Still going to the psychiatrist. Don't you feel sorry for me?" "No, I don't feel sorry for you at all. You said you were going to the psychiatrist, but that was a lie, right?" Scott looked at me in surprise. He might be good at lying, but not at keeping secrets. "No, it's not a lie. I went last week." His eyes darted around, making it obvious he was lying. "Then show me your medical appointment card." I don't have it with me right now. Wait, are you doubting me, Mom? I'm your son." Just then, the doorbell rang, and I opened the front door, suspecting who it might be, and sure enough, it was her. Scott's here right now. What? Angelica? Hey there! It was Scott's mistress, Angelica. After Scott left our house, Angelica had visited once, asking for Scott's whereabouts since she couldn't contact him. I was surprised she had the nerve to ask me, his mother, but I told her Scott would likely be coming home soon. What timing for her to show up. Why is Angelica here? Your mom said you might be here soon, so I decided to visit. Lucky me, you're actually here. No, I mean, what? Your mom knows about us, and that you're not really going to the hospital, and that Scott wants my savings and wishes I'd hurry up and pass away. Scott's face turned pale. From his mouth came feeble words like, "That's not true," and "I care about you, Mom." But none of it resonated with me anymore. Everything about the old company and going to the psychiatrist was true. Only for the first visit, though. Scott tried to silence Angelica, but by then, such stories didn't matter to me. So you've been lying to me all this time. I don't want to live with someone who lies so easily. I said this and kicked him out. That same day, Scott, Kiera, and Angelica showed up at my house together, all three looking disheveled and injured. It seemed Kiera had found out about the affair, but I couldn't fathom why they'd come to my house. I want nothing more to do with you. I let them in only because they were making a scene outside. Dora, you knew everything, right? That Scott quit his job and was cheating with this woman? Yes, that's right. And you said nothing? I'm divorcing Scott. I'll demand compensation from these two. Since Scott's jobless, Dora, you should pay. It's only fair, right? You're his mother and you knew about his affair. Why should I, at my age, pay for my over 40-year-old son Scott's mistakes? As I was about to argue, Angelica dropped a bombshell. But you were using Scott's money to go to host clubs. I accidentally saw you leaving one. What? No, Host clubs? You were wasting the money I worked so hard to earn on host clubs? You, who have been cheating, are hardly in any position to say anything. Wow, scary. No wonder Scott doesn't want to go back to you. Kiera's face turned even more demonic as she and Angelica began fighting furiously. Scott tried to intervene but ended up getting hit by both of them. Watching this, I called Kiera's parents. About 30 minutes later, the house intercom rang and I went to open the entrance door. Kiera's parents were at the entrance. While we were exchanging greetings, Kiera's yelling and loud noises could be heard from the other room. I invited them inside and explained the situation. As they entered, the chaos in the living room halted abruptly. Mom? Dad? Kiera's parents apologized to me, then sternly took her away. Scott clung to me, begging, but I firmly sent him and Angelica away too. Thus, the tumultuous chapter involving Scott, Kiera, and Angelica came to an end, and I regained my peaceful life. Later, Scott and his wife returned to his in-laws' home with them. However, after the in-laws found out about Scott's infidelity and Kiera's visits to host clubs, they reportedly became angry and kicked them out of the house. Kiera, having been kicked out and with nowhere else to turn, reportedly decided not to divorce Scott. Instead, they rented an apartment and continued living together. Scott, left with little choice, tried to find another job but was unsuccessful. He ended up working part-time at a convenience store near their home. However, he was constantly berated by Kiera every day. And now his mental state has deteriorated to the point where he can hardly function. It seems he's currently undergoing treatment at a psychiatric clinic. Scott, struggling to find a job, ended up working part-time at a convenience store near my house. I've been ignoring Kiera's pleas for help. She needs to learn the hard way after living off others' money and indulging in host clubs without working a day. Now that peace of mind is returned, I'm back to enjoying karaoke with my part-time job friends, something I had stopped doing since Scott's arrival. I couldn't go out and enjoy myself knowing that Scott was suffering, and also to avoid Kiera finding out about my leisure activities. Dora, I can't believe you can sing such modern songs. I have to learn from my grandkids, but it's hard to keep up. While I was singing a popular song of the time, that's what one of my part-time colleagues told me. I learned about the song from my grandson, who was the child of my second son and his spouse, and I've been practicing it. I've promised to go karaoke with my grandchildren the next time they visit. I'm practicing trendy songs, imagining their surprised faces.